I'll give you a little bit of an overview of ICTS as an institution and hopefully not taking too long and keeping you from the main attraction of the evening. But so ICTS is a very new institution. It's a center of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, but set up with a very specific goal. Before I come to that, I just want to give you a bird's overview of the campus, which is not huge, so you might have already explored much of it. This is actually what the architects had imagined it, conceptualized in 2012 or so when the construction began. By 2015, we moved into the campus, and by 2017, we are essentially now in the stage where you see us. So most everything, the facilities are all functional. You might have seen our library next door. It's a nice building, and there's the computer center, the guest house where maybe you're staying, etc. So, so the buildings are there. But ICTS is more than just its buildings. So the mandate of ICTS is somewhat novel, especially in the Indian context, because it weaves together three different themes. We have our own in-house research, about which I'll say a little bit. But importantly, we run these programs in some ways patterned on the MSRI in mathematics, which of course you are all familiar with, but other institutions, KITP, the Newton Institute, and so on. But with innovations, because we combine various ingredients that many of the other institutions don't have. We have programs not only in mathematics, but in theoretical physics, in quantitative biology, theoretical computer science, and so on. So a wider canvas of theoretical sciences in some ways. And our programs are often quite integrated with our research, but we do have programs in areas where we don't have research staff. As well. And moreover, these are tied in with our outreach events, which we take quite seriously and have a number of, have a fairly vigorous outreach activities. So that's all that, I think this combination makes it somewhat unique even internationally, and definitely holds out, I think, a lot of possibilities for Indian science. Our researchers, word about them, they're all young people working in a variety of areas in theoretical physics, maths, computer science. Well, hopefully going into theoretical computer science. We have people in the first three here, specifically people in astrophysics, string theory, statistical mechanics, condensed matter physics, biophysics, fluid dynamics. Well, mathematics now actually is beginning to expand. We have a group in probability, in geometry, and in also geometry and mathematical physics, and also in PDEs and big data. Yeah, so our gravitational wave group definitely made headlines with their important contributions in the analysis of the LIGO data. The programs that ICTS organize are again on a very wide canvas. We aim to be not just, we are not a passive conference center or a funding agency. I like to emphasize that difference, because we do try actively to bring in programs in areas where we would like to build capabilities in India, new directions, new areas of research. And of course, like many of our peers elsewhere, we want to get researchers to come together, spend time, and come up with new ideas by not emphasizing too much of a conference aspect. These are just examples of various areas in India which I think had not so much of research efforts, and we have tried to so in terms of numbers, I think we've had about 140 plus 64 programs, discussion meetings, of which several Chandrasekhar lectures in the physical sciences, Ramanujan, like the present one, in the mathematical sciences, and Turing in biology and computer science. over 13,000 participants, and a lot of talks, and all archived. As you see, we are set up to record our lectures and put them up on the internet for as a resource for the whole world. We have various other special lecture series as well, and I think our programs in general have been in high demand, and our 2019 calendar is essentially filled, and we are moving towards a system where anyone, any of you can submit program proposals to ICTS. There's an online submission system. Right now, we are accepting proposals till, the deadline is December 31st to accept proposals for programs to be held between April 2020 and September 2020. And then after December, we'll keep a call out for the next 6 months, so September 2020 to March 2021, and so on. So it's an open system, and we welcome proposals in any of the areas of that ICTS covers. This is these are just some candidate sort of sample programs that we've had. They've been largely on physics. I would say about 60% of the programs have been on physics, about 30% in maths, and 10% in some of the rest. But we, as you have seen our calendar of upcoming events, I think the maths component is increasing, and I see that as a healthy sign, and I hope there'll be more of that as we go ahead. Our outreach, again, is, as I said, something we take very seriously, do vigorously. We have had several public lectures by many people you will recognize. And again, these have been on YouTube, and our YouTube channel is very popular with many, many views and a number of subscribers, I think, almost catching up with that of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Other special outreach events we've had include the 100 Years of General Relativity, where we had a special event as part of the Strings 2019, Strings 2015 meeting at ICTS. We had a special set of so-called Einstein lectures, where we've been partnering with institutions around the country and helping to take some of our speakers to colleges around the country. We were part of the Mathematics of Planet Earth, which was a global initiative, and ICTS was a partner, and we actually designed a lot of maths exhibits for outreach, and we have a very nice booklet of all those exhibits that we brought out aimed at high school students or so, and it's available in PDF format on our webpage if you're interested. The exhibition, the physical exhibition, was held at the museum in the city, and a lot of people attended it. Pictures of some of our public events. Something that we have started about 2 years ago is something called Copy with Curiosity. Copy is coffee, and so the format is somewhat unusual. We hold it at the planetarium once a month on a Sunday, and it has a sort of a lecture cum discussion format. So there's a lot of time for questions and discussion at the end of it, almost as long as for the talk itself. And it's been very well received with the school students and members of the public attending. This is one of the recent ones we had, which was on making science with everyday things. Here you see matchsticks and rubber bands being used to. Again, on a very wide variety of topics, ranging from things in mathematics to theoretical physics, computer science, and even the history of science, and so on. There's one, by the way, this weekend. It's more on the role of science in India, and by the principal scientific advisor to the government, Professor Vijay Raghavan, who is a biologist. As part of our 10th anniversary event, we had a set of intense events, including a big conference on the ICTS at 10, and a public lecture and panel discussion on the usefulness of useless knowledge, which is something that Robert Dijkgraaf has been, Robert Dijkgraaf of the Institute for Advanced Study gave a talk on that, followed by a panel discussion with these folks here. And shortly afterwards, there was a public lecture by Kip Thorne, which was more like a concert event which we held in the foyer of the main Chandrasekhar Auditorium. So, so that's just to give you a glimpse of the kind of things we do. And I think that's the end, and I hope you will all enjoy your stay at ICTS. If you had feedback on your experiences, anything we can do to improve your experience here, do convey it to the program cell. We are constantly looking at how we can make it a place where you can come and do great science and enjoy collaborating and discussing and learning new stuff. So with that, let me conclude, and I hand it over to Professor Sorin Dumitrescu, who will introduce the speaker of today, Professor Claire Voisin. I would like to thank her for agreeing to give these lectures at the ICTS, and but Sorin will tell you more about her.
Okay, hello. It's a pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Claire Voisin. She's currently professor in Collège de France, and where she holds the chair of algebraic geometry. For the matter of fact, she's a world leader in complex algebraic geometry. She's member of French Academy of Science, and through her long and diverse career, she proved important theorem and also opened new perspective in a wide range of areas. Her remarkable results are inspiring and transform the field, and also led to solutions of important problems which were there for many years and had seemed out of reach at the time. Let me just tell about one or two of these famous results. One of them is the disproving by Professor Claire Voisin of Kobayashi conjecture, Kodaira conjecture. The conjecture is the following. When one deforms the complex structure on a projective manifold, the new complex manifold is not projective anymore, but still belongs to a larger class of complex manifolds, which are Kähler, meaning they admit a nice metric structure which is compatible with the complex structure. Conversely, Kodaira completed the list of complex surfaces and observed that any Kähler surface is a small deformation of a projective surface. So naturally, he asked if any Kähler manifold is a small deformation of a projective manifold. And this question was open for 40 years when Claire discovered manifolds which are Kähler, but do not have the same topology, do not have the same homotopical type as any projective manifold. And Claire was able to construct simply connected manifolds with this property, and also to construct Kähler manifolds such that any bimeromorphic model has an homotopical type which is different to the type of a projective manifold. So for this discovery, Claire Voisin had a Shaw Prize, and this is one of those remarkable results. There are other important results about the group which encodes subvarieties, algebraic subvarieties in algebraic version. And Claire made important progress to understand those groups for K3 surfaces and more generally for holomorphic symplectic manifolds. And these results led to the demonstration, to the proof of another celebrated conjecture, which was Bloch conjecture in some important cases. There is also some very important work in rationality problems, and then Claire will speak us about these results. So I will just say that Claire Voisin is a wonderful speaker and very inspiring person and inspiring mathematician. And I feel we are privileged to be here and to have the opportunity to listen Claire Ramanujan lectures. Thank you.
So I thank the Infosys Foundation and the ICTS for the invitation to give the Ramanujan lecture, and also Sorin for this very beautiful introduction. So, as he said, I will speak about the rationality problem for algebraic varieties. So let me describe very generally what it means. So I will consider smooth projective varieties, mostly over the complex numbers, but from time to time I will allude to the most important condition here is that the field is algebraically closed and of characteristic zero. And sometimes I will allude to the situation in a non-zero characteristic, which is very important also for that subject. And so that means that X is, well, I use this notation of differential geometers, so you can see it inside some projective space defined by homogeneous polynomial equations. And if you don't like algebraic geometry, it's no problem, because alternatively you can see X as a closed complex submanifold of CPN. And here that means that locally your X is defined by a holomorphic equation satisfying the Jacobian local Jacobian condition, which guarantees the smoothness. And here, similarly, of course, one should ask smoothness and only local independence of the differentials of the equations defining the X. And the fact that these definitions are equivalent is due to Chow, that has been already mentioned this morning by Bruno. And now I will give a sort of a very low, down to earth definition of a rational map between two algebraic varieties. So now I have X and Y, and I want to define what is a rational map. This is simply defined as follows. So your Y, you can consider it as contained in some projective space. And so I will define this as the data of, phi 0, phi n. So where the phi I are rational functions on X. And of course, I want this. Of course, will only define a rational map from X to CPN. I can modify this phi 0, phi n by multiplying all of them by a certain function f, but it's not very important for me. And of course, now I want that my y is defined by equations di equals 0, so the number of polynomial equations, and what I want is that di of phi 0, phi n is 0 for any I. So this is saying that the equation vanishing on y will vanish when composed with phi. So, well, this is a sort of a low-level definition of a rational map between x and y. So now, what we can so we can make more definition. So you see your phi here, and it's not a morphism; it's only a rational map. That means that there are indeterminacies. Typically, when all the functions phi 0 to phi n vanish, then the map to projective space has some indetermination, because a point in projective space should be n plus 1 tuple of numbers which are non, the total n plus 1 tuple should be non-zero. So, but nevertheless, of course, there exists an open set of X where the phi is well defined, so you can speak of this, by definition, that is the phi of the regular locus, the determination locus of phi, so this is an open set. And so the definition is that phi is dominant if this image of phi contains an open set of y. So it only contains an open set because, by restricting to an open set of x, we lose the projectivity or the sort of compactness, and so you do not expect surjectivity. Okay, and then the definition is that phi is birational if it admits an inverse which has the same form. There exists phi from y to x, which is a rational map, a rational morphism, such that phi composed with phi is the identity of x, and similarly, phi composed with phi is the identity of y as a rational maps. Okay, and then now this allows to introduce several interesting notions of how close an algebraic variety can be to projective space. So the definition, I say that X is unirational if there exists a dominant, in this sense, rational map from Pn to x. A priori, it's for some n, but you can see that one can reduce the case where n is the dimension of x, simply because if the dimension is higher here, you can replace your Pn by a hyperplane section or linear subspace of the right dimension, and if it is in general position, it will still dominate. Okay, so this is the first notion. Then X is rational if it is birational to Pn. Now it's of course the n the one which is determined by the definition, by the dimension of x. So I didn't say that the x is supposed to be connected, so it has a dimension, etc. And finally, x is steadily rational for some r, for some integer r, x cross PR is rational. Okay, so these are the main definition I will consider, and there is an obvious chain of implication. Namely, that immediately follows from the definitions that rational implies stably rational, because in the definition of stably rational, it's just a case where r is equal to 0, and then this implies that this implies unirationality. Because if x is a stably rational, that means that x cross PR is rational, and x cross PR dominates x by the projection. Okay, so well, and maybe now let me formulate a last definition, which won't play an enormous role, but which is more satisfactory for algebraic geometers. Which is the following, that x is rationally connected if this was a notion, very important notion, which was introduced by Collin, Miaoka, Mori, independently by Campana in the 90s. If well, the set theoretic naive definition is to say this: for any 2 points in X, there exists a rational curve in X passing through these 2 points. For example, 0 maps to X and the infinite maps to Y. It turns out that this presentation of the property is correct, because we are over the field C, which is uncountable. So finally, using an argument with Chow varieties, etc., finally we get the general, more theoretic definition of rational connectedness. So let me write the more accurate. Okay. With a more accurate definition, which in fact follows from this: if we are over C, there exists a rational map. So B has to be, you can take it to be smooth projective. And now you have a phi, which is a rational map. Okay, so rational and dominant. Okay. With the property that phi of B cross 0 is in fact contained in your point X. That means that you can see your B as parameterizing the curves P1 inside X, and by this condition, you say that all of your curves are passing through X, and phi restricted to B cross infinity is dominant. And then you see that let's say exactly that for the general point Y here, I will have a rational curve here that is point B here, such that P1 cross B, the 0 will be mapped to X, and the infinite will be mapped to Y. Okay, so there are some technicalities which comes from a countability of Chow varieties, which make these two definitions equivalent. If we are over a countable field, to the contrary, the right definition is to use this one. And now the last obvious implication is the fact that unirational implies that implies rational connectedness. The reason I mention this is that we don't know well how behaves the category, the class of unirational varieties. In fact, we don't have at the moment any good characterization of it, while all the work of Kolar, Miyaoka-Mori and the subsequent work proves that this class behaves very, very well, in particular it is stable under deformations. There is also this Graber-Arista result. So this is really the right notion to work with. And this implication, the converse is really, so it is believed that to be a strict implication, but this is really an enormous problem that nobody has touched up to now. So, the classical problem is the Lurot problem, or in the stable version, the stable Lurot problem is whether the implication, or more precisely this implication and this one here, whether they are equivalent. And so the problem is, so assume X is unirational. Well, we could as well ask the question for rationally connected. Is X rational? And in the stable version, is X stably rational? So, in some sense, this is the subject of the lecture, but I think that the series of lectures, I think that maybe a more interesting question is the following. The related problem, if you like, which is to construct stable birational invariant. So by this I mean the following. So I say that X and Y, so they are smooth and projective, are stably birational or stably birationally equivalent if for some integers R S, X cross P to the R is birational to Y cross P to the S. And so that defines an equivalence relation on the set of the smooth projective algebraic varieties. And the question is to construct invariants or quantities or properties which are constant in a given equivalence class. So now the subject has two aspects. Of course, this is very interesting to construct such a stable birational invariant. The problem is that at the end, we are motivated by this problem. So the question is to construct such a stable birational invariant which can be non-zero for some unirational variety or rationally connected varieties. So let me give an example where the answer will be somewhat interesting. It is here that I will use the fact that X is smooth and projective. Up to now, the definition absolutely did not use smoothness. In fact, all the definitions I mentioned were considering only the function field of X. That means that we are looking at X as the generic point. But now, and that's why having smooth projective model is very important, that the invariant will be, in general, computed on those smooth projective models. So the example is this. I consider, again, X smooth projective, and I consider H0 of X, omega X, tensor K, for a fixed integer K greater than or equal to 0. And I say that this is a stable birational invariant of X smooth projective. And if I don't put a projective here, this is completely wrong. So what is this? This is called pluriforms. It is for K. Well, usually we consider the algebraic differential forms, where we consider only the wedge K omega X, which is part of this. But more generally, we consider all the tensor products. Sometimes they are also called holomorphic contravariant tensors. Okay, so maybe so I can explain why this is true. So to show that the quantity is stably birationally invariant, we have to show that it does not change when you replace X by X cross PR. We want invariance under this equivalence and under, birational maps. Okay. So here the invariance for this invariant here that will follow from the fact that H0 of PR, omega PR, here tensor L is equal to 0 for any strictly positive L. And then you use a sort of Punnett formula for the product. And here the definition, the proof is also maybe more interesting because it explains where and why we have to assume that the X is projective. So we have this rational map here. Now there is a lemma, which is of course well known in algebraic geometry, which needs both projectivity of Y and smoothness of X. That the indeterminacy locus of phi has a codimension at least 2. X, so it's a closed analytic subset. Well, the reason maybe, well, I already erased, but basically, well, naively, recall that your map was given like this. We meet essentially a problem where when all the coordinates vanish together. And well, if this happens along a divisor, we can divide all the coordinates by the equation defining this divisor. So that's why this is true. And so the conclusion is that we have a U contained in X, where the map phi, which was only a rational map, is a true morphism. So maybe call it like this. And now, because it is a true morphism, by the contravariance, I get this phi, the pullback map from H0 of omega Y tensor K to H0 of omega U tensor K. And now, because the U is a complement of a subset of codimension at least 2, by sort of a Hartog or by normality, if you like. You conclude that Hartog will be in the complex analysis setting, and normality is the terminology used by algebraic geometers. This is in fact the same as H0 of x omega x tensor k. This is because here we have a certain holomorphic vector bundle, and you have a holomorphic section defined away from a closed analytic subset of codimensionalities 2. And by these two maps, finally, I succeeded to construct a pullback map on pluriforms. And then to conclude that the pluridifferential forms on X are the same as the pluridifferential form on Y, I just use the inverse. Here I have the phi minus 1, and similarly I have the phi minus 1 upper star, which is defined exactly by the same way. So now it's okay. And finally, I constructed a morphism and its inverse, and that gives me this invariance under birational maps. Okay, and now the problem with this invariant is the following. That if X is rationally connected, all these pluridifferential forms vanish for k if the degree is strictly positive. Well, maybe I can also explain why this is true. It's because I recall, maybe I should not have, I have this, which defines the rational connectedness. And using, so I know that phi restricted to B cross infinity is dominant. And phi contracts B cross 0 to the point X. And using this, so now you can also use that small lemma about the fact that the morphisms are defined away from a subset of codimensionalities 2. I can choose B cross P1, and such that here B will be a general point. And phi is well defined near this B cross P1. Furthermore, it is well defined near B cross P1, and a sort of a third property says that phi is of maximal rank generically along this B cross P1. Maximal rank, because we want to have this dominant property. And then you conclude from this that if you consider the phi upper star, so now this phi is near this B cross P1, so it's well defined. Omega x restricted to B cross P1. Everything is well defined because I suppose that the map is well has no indeterminacies near that B cross P1. In fact, it's a negative negative bundle. So we know holomorphic vector bundles on P1. They are a sum of direct sum of line bundles, which are characterized by their degree, and the bundle is said to be negative if all the degrees which appear are negative, strictly negative. And so you conclude that H0 of phi upper star omega x tensor K restricted to B cross P1 is 0 if you take a strictly positive tensor product. And so, and because the B is general, you conclude that finally there is no section. Finally, you conclude that there is no algebraic or holomorphic section of this. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention this stable birational invariant, also it is not useful finally for our problem over C. It's because now if I shift to non-zero characteristic, that invariant is useful, and it has been used recently by recently and not non-recently. It has been used by Collard and Totaro to contribute to these rationality problems. So maybe I write it as a remark. So the argument I gave failed in non-zero characteristic. Non-zero characteristics, I assume the field is algebraically closed, and where the argument failed is exactly here. It is saying that if you have, it says in particular that if you have a dominant morphism, it has to be of maximal rank at some point. That is, the differential is surjective. And this is completely wrong in a non-zero characteristic because there are the separability issues and there are dominant maps which are, whose differential is everywhere 0, for example. And then all that part of the argument falls down. So, and in fact, so the question is the problem of inseparability. And there is a very interesting fact that there exists rationally connected, smooth rationally connected projective varieties, even well, essentially smooth hypersurfaces in projective space in non-zero characteristic. Which have some non-zero sections of zero of some power. Even it's not even you don't need to go far in a pluridifferential form, so you can take usual. Okay, of course here it's the theory of algebraic differential forms. Okay. So now let me turn to the Lurot problem and its stable version. What is known about it? And in fact, everything in some sense is known about it. As I said, I want to emphasize more the search for new stable birational invariant, because in that form the problem was entirely solved in the 70s. So I explain this now. So, on the Lurot problem. Well, so the answer depends on the dimension. Now, in dimension 1, the situation is this. And this works in any characteristic. The field has to be algebraically closed. It's very important. So you have this phi which is dominant. Okay, this is a positive round square. That implies that X is isomorphic to P1. And that the proof, in some sense, it is in 1 or 2 lines, because you say the following: you choose X, Y in P1, 2 points. You have to assume that they are not mapped to the same point in X. Now we are in P1, so there exists a function f, which is a rational function. Which has a property that it has one pole, 1, 0 at X, only 1, 0, and 1 pole at Y. So in other words, its divisor is X minus Y, counted with multiplicity 1. Okay? And now you just take the norm of f. It is a multiplicative push forward of your function. And this is g. And that gives you a rational function on x, which will have the property that it has exactly 1, 0 at the image of the point x, and 1 pole at the image of the point y. Okay, so that means that this rational function g, in turn, will give a map. In fact, it's a true morphism, like this. And the inverse image of 0 is just 1 point. The inverse image of infinite is just 1 point. And finally, that gives this isomorphism. So, so that's it for the case where n equal 1. Of course, I could use uniformization or things like that, but it's much simpler to do it directly. You produce the rational function. The point also is that this proof works in any characteristic. If you want to use uniformization, classification of Riemann surfaces by the number of differential forms, you need to know more. And then the next case is dimension 2. And here I have to assume that we are over, at least in a non-zero characteristic. And again, if X is, in fact, only rationally connected surface, it is rational. And the reason is that, for example, we can use what we have done before. So I do this. We know that H0 of x omega x tensor k is 0. This is by the rational connectedness. There are no pluridifferential forms of positive degree. And in particular, H0 of x omega x, so the holomorphic one forms are 0. And H0 of, now I need this, kx tensor 2. So kx is wedge 2 omega x. And so it is contained in omega x tensor 2. And so kx tensor 2, it is a one direct segment in here. So in case this implication will imply that this space is 0. And now there is a classical theorem due to Noether, which says that, so this number usually it's called Q, and this number is called P2, the second plurigenus. X surface with Q equal P2 equals 0 implies that X is rational. Okay, so already the proof becomes much more intricate. And starting from dimension 3, it's very simple. The answer is no. So in dimension n, 1 and 2, we had a positive answer to the Lurot problem. Even in the strong, very strong form that all the various notions that have been introduced here are equivalent. Now I consider the case where n equals 3, and then there have been three major contributions in around 1970. One by Iskowski and Manin. The second by Clemens and Griffiths. And the third by Artin and Mumford. So the first two contributions, I consider only the Lurot problem, not its stable version. So the result of Iskowski and Manin is the following. If you take a smooth hypersurface, X in P4 is irrational, and they explain why. They compute the birational automorphism group, and they show that it is in fact finite. In fact, more precisely, they show this equality, which implies that it is finite. And this, sorry? Sorry. Okay. Thank you. So this equality, well, it's the weak version or the small version of being birationally rigid. Similar argument has been applied recently by Defernex and other people and this applies as well to higher degree hypersurfaces. So you need, for example, degree D in CPD. We see this is a similar generalization. Then the similar argument works. But by the structure of the argument, you see that that does not apply to stable rationality. Because if you want to study stable rationality by applying this kind of method, you will need to compute this group of birational automorphism of X cross PR. And that's really a major issue. I mean, I know essentially no result in the direction of computing this birational automorphism group. So this was their contribution. The second is due to Clemens and Griffiths, and they prove that very famous smooth hypersurface again in P4 of degree 3 is not rational. And here the argument is very beautiful, but the situation is still worse than before, in the sense that their argument works only in dimension 3. There is no generalization like that. And the reason is that they introduce a birational invariant, which is even defined only for rationally connected threefold. The Clemens-Griffiths invariant. You consider X, which is a rationally connected threefold. And you construct a principally polarized abelian variety. So it's a complex torus which has a unimodular principal polarization, which has a complex torus. So you consider the cohomology of X with complex coefficients, and under this assumption of being rationally connected, so the Hodge decomposition has only two pieces. Okay, so this is two complex, two conjugate complex vector spaces, and now and inside this you have integral cohomology, okay? And here you can use the intersection pairing on the middle degree cohomology of X, and this is unimodular. And so the GX is the complex torus, which is a quotient of this complex vector space by integral cohomology. And using this unimodular intersection pairing, you realize that this complex torus is in fact an abelian variety, that is a projective complex torus with a principal polarization. And the Clemens-Griffiths argument is very beautiful. It is not very hard. It uses the resolution of indeterminacies, a little bit of Hironaka. The criterion is this: if X, which is again a rationally connected threefold, is rational, then its intermediate Jacobian GX has a principally polarized abelian variety. So you have really to consider not only the complex torus, but also the theta divisor, that is section of the line bundle defined by the polarization. Then is in fact a direct sum of Jacobian of curves. The theory of Jacobian of curves, it's well known, so it produces also principally polarized abelian varieties, and we have this criterion, which basically is the idea essentially is to say that if you have your X, which is birational to P3, you will say that after blowing up, you have a sequence of blow up. In fact, this is the inverse rational map, will be a true homomorphism. Okay? And now the point is that when you blow up, if you blow up a point, you do not change the intermediate Jacobian, and if you blow up a smooth curve, what you add to the intermediate Jacobian is precisely the Jacobian of the curve. So that means that for this variety, the intermediate Jacobian, actually, it is a direct sum of Jacobian of curves. And then you use the fact that this morphism is of degree 1. And so that makes, by the definition that we have, the intermediate Jacobian of X into a direct summand, orthogonal direct summand of the intermediate Jacobian of this one. And finally, you also have to say something about irreducibility, the fact that every principally polarized abelian variety admits a unique direct sum decomposition as an orthogonal product, orthogonal for this pairing of irreducible abelian varieties. And the last point is that Jacobian of curves are irreducible. And finally, if you put everything together, you get this. And so the proof in the Clemens-Griffiths theorem then focus, and all the papers which have been using this theorem have focused on proving the fact that the variety we were considering does not satisfy this property. So it was a study of whether a given intermediate Jacobian like this is a direct sum of Jacobian of curves. Okay, and now I mention the subject which will be so the main subject of the lecture starting from tomorrow. So this is the strategy tree of Artin and Mumford. So Artin and Mumford, theorem. There exists, in fact, a unirational threefold, which is not stably rational. And so now, what is the ingredient they use, the invariant? So now it's much, the situation is very different because this is stable rationality that they want to disprove. That passes through the following result, theorem. If X is stably rational, then the torsion in the Betti homology of X with integral coefficient is 0. And one can say that more generally, this group torsion of H3 of XZ is stable by rational invariant. Okay, so this is the invariant they use. So maybe, well, I could possibly explain why this is the easy part is really proving the fact that this is a stable birational invariant. The hard part is to construct an X which has a non-trivial Artin-Mumford invariant. And, this is done as follows. So now they consider, now they construct a certain X0 tilde, which is unirational, and which has a non-trivial Artin-Mumford invariant. Okay, so this is exactly what we want. So let me say how looks this variety. So I start with P3 with homogeneous coordinates x0 and x0 is unfortunate like this. And now they show the F0, which is a degree 4 polynomial, homogeneous polynomial. So that will define a surface of degree 4, but it's not any one. That's why I call it F0. What I want is that the surface, which is defined by this equation, so it's a surface in P3. I want that it has 10 nodes. Nodes, or if you like, ordinary double points. That means that locally the equation of the surface looks like x squared plus y squared plus z squared equals 0. So then you have an ordinary dimension 2 quadratic singularity. And these 10 nodes, they are in a spectral position. I don't want to explain. So it's a rather intricate construction. And so now the X0, it is a double cover of P3. It is defined by the equation U square equal f0. That is for essentially for each value of f0, there are two values of u, except when f0 equals 0, so it is a double cover ramified along the surface S0. So this double cover, as you can see, it will have also 10 nodes, ordinary double points, because each time the surface has this local equation, then the x0 tilde, the x0, sorry, will have the equation, which is also the equation of an ordinary quadratic double point in dimension 3 now. Okay. And so the x0 tilde is obtained simply by desingularizing this x0 by blowing up the knot. So this is the example, and as you see, it's really very hard to get it. And for a long time, since 1970, there was essentially no other example of rationally connected threefold, so unirational, but not stably rational. That was the only known invariant allowing to disprove stable rationality in dimension 3. And so my contribution to the subject, and that will be a larger part of the lecture, is that I prove the following. So theorem. So let X be the general or very general quartic double solid. That is, the equation is u squared is equal to f of x0 x3. But now, instead of this f0, I take a general, very general degré for polynomial. Then X is not stably rational. On the other hand, we know it's quite easy. It follows from the Lefschetz result of Lefschetz on the topology of hypersurfaces, of smooth hypersurfaces. Precisely, the Artin-Mumford invariant is trivial in that case. And also, we know it's very classical that X is unirational. So I am going to discuss this. I should stop soon. Let me explain a little the logic on how this theorem is related to the Artin-Mumford one. The point is that I will introduce, starting from maybe tomorrow or after tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the notion of for example, I will do cohomological decomposition of the diagonal. Okay. Maybe integral to insist that it is with cohomology with integral coefficient. And the point is that this is a necessary condition for stable rationality. This implies the vanishing, the existence of such decomposition of the Artin-Mumford invariant. And In fact, a stronger version of this is that if I take an X like this, it does not admit an integral homologipole decomposition. So, of course, the discussion can be done also in a Chow setting. And because of this, this is the reason why it is not stably rational. So, let me say in one line how that is obtained from the Artin-Mumford construction. Essentially, what I show is that if the general X admitted the decomposition of the diagonal, also the X0 tilde, which is a spectral fiber of the family, would admit such a decomposition of the diagonal. But this is impossible because that would imply for the X0 tilde that it has the vanishing of the Artin-Mumford invariant. So that does not work. So this is curious because the general X does not have this Artin-Mumford invariant, but the stronger property that the decomposition of the diagonal exists, it does not have it because by specializing there is this Artin-Mumford invariant which appears and which prevents. So this is what happened, and the conclusion, maybe I will discuss this also, is that to understand what is the true geometric obstruction, invariant in the previous sense, that is contained here, which prevents stable rationality, and I will discuss what is geometrically contained in that notion. I will stop here.